Okay, from the beginning. موطني الجمال والجمال والثناء والبهاء في رباك والحياة والنجاة والهناء والنجاء في هواك هل أراك سالما منعما وغانما مكرما سالما منعما وغانما مكرما هل أراك في علاك تبلغ سمك موطني
Thank you again for the song. I don't think that Ilan Pappé needs any introduction, but just to be really brief, Ilan Pappé has been active as a scholar since 1980s, when he was one of the so-called Israeli new historians who brought substantial evidence challenging the main founding narratives of the establishment of the State of Israel, and specifically new interpretations of what exactly happened during the 1948 war. These events are the subject of his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, which we present here today for the first time in Czech translation by Ruth Jochanan Weiniger. So, I would like to begin this debate by asking you when you first started to question the founding myths and Israeli narratives about 1948. Well, was there a specific event, or what was your motivation?
First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for those standing in the outside. I hope you'll survive to the end. I admire you already. And thank you for the Alarm publishing house and for Jana. Without her, I probably would not have been here. And it's a great pleasure to see you all. Now, to your question.
It's a pleasure for us as well.
Yeah,
so thank you again.
Thank you. There was not one event. It was a journey that coincided several processes together. One was my interest in history. From a very early age, I wanted to be a professional historian, and it sounded natural to want to research your own country's history. And secondly, I was looking for a thesis for my PhD career, and it made sense to follow a certain rule of declassification of archives that was happening both in Israel, in Britain, and actually also in some other countries. So in 1978, when I started to think of myself as a professional historian, long before many of you have been born, I think, I thought that it would be good to write a dissertation on the basis of documents nobody has seen before. So that's why 48. And of course, I also realized that 1948 was a very formative and important year in the history of the country. I also, I think what caused me to kind of begin to question seriously the founding myth of Israel was not just the choice of history or the choice of 1948, but two additional facts. One is that I decided to do my doctorate outside of Israel. And you know, from the outside you see things that are very difficult to see from inside a very indoctrinated society. So you needed to go outside. I also chose by coincidence, an Arab supervisor, the late Albert Horani, and that gives you a different perspective. And I met a lot of Palestinians during my PhD years in Oxford, in Britain, and it was the first time I met Palestinian academics and scholars on an equal footing, something I couldn't do in Israel. And it was easier to have a more candid dialogue. But I think more important than anything else was the evidence in the documents. The evidence for me contradicted almost everything I knew when I was interested in history. Everything I knew about the history of my country, the history of 1948 in particular. It contradicted what I learned at school. It contradicted what I heard from my teachers in the university, from my family members, and from the public domain in Israel in general. So this kind of choice of professional historical research into 1948 with the help of declassified documents created for me a picture of history that was very different from the one I was brought about. I should add, and with this I would end this answer, that I reached my final kind of stages in the PhD during the first Lebanon war, the first Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. For a certain group of Israelis, and I was part of them, this was the first time we experienced in our lifetime at least, a war that was a war of choice, a war that was not necessary. And I saw what happened in Lebanon from England. So you see things that you wouldn't be able to see from inside Israel. And then when you are questioning the legitimacy of one war, you begin to ask, shouldn't you question the legitimacies of the previous wars, and especially the most important one? So I'm describing to you something that didn't happen in one day, of course. This is a process of a few years that culminated in finishing the doctoral dissertation in 1984, and then coming back to Israel and trying to integrate into the Israeli Academic Society with a very different view on 1948 and its significance for both Israel and Palestine.
What did you feel after your personal revelations at that time? You know, like, what do you think that all these things that you heard all your life were, let's say, at least biased, like what you were feeling?
I was naive. I thought Israel was a democracy, and therefore people would welcome what I'm going to tell them. I genuinely felt that way. I remember I came back and I was invited to television and radio debates like this, and I thought, you know, I will tell the people what they don't know. I was surprised by the very hostile reaction. I didn't expect it. I really thought that, you know, in a democracy, when you tell people about an unpleasant chapter in their history and so on, there's an openness. I'm generalizing. There were people who were willing to listen, but all in all, challenging the official narrative of Israel about 1948, or the official Israeli narrative about the history of Israel and Palestine in general, is regarded as an act of treason, and not is welcomed as, you know, a constructive criticism by an academic.
Do you have any, let's say, personal theory why it is so unacceptable for Israeli society to talk openly about these things? Or was it different maybe back then? Does it, you know, change throughout the decades? What's your stance on this?
No, I think that 1948 in the eyes of Israelis is the most, kind of the holiest year of them all. The year of miracle, the end of 2,000 years of exile. Nothing could be negative about that year. So you're really challenging a very sacred historical moment. I mean, if I would have challenged, let's say, some of the Israeli policies in 1982 or in 1956, I think the reaction would have been less harsh. Secondly, I think people understood that we are talking about the origins of the state. So you are not just challenging the narrative of what happened in 1948, you are casting moral and ideological questions about the validity of the state itself. I didn't realize it immediately. I thought that this kind of revelations did not necessarily put questions of the legitimacy of the Zionist project altogether. That happened a bit later when I wrote this book for the first time in English, which was many, many years after I started my journey. I finished my PhD in 1984, and I published the book in 2006, but it took me 6 years to write it. So it was a journey that was completed in many ways in 2006, but then the divorce was completed.
So let's talk about this book. As the very title of this book implies, you directly refer to the actions of Haganah and Irgun in 1948 whatever, as ethnic cleansing of Palestine. On what basis do you claim this? Like, what was actually happening back then?
Yeah. It started with my questioning of the Palestinian term from 1948, which is the Nakba, a catastrophe in English. And I thought catastrophe is, when you talk about catastrophe, you know that there are victims of a catastrophe, but you don't know who's responsible for the catastrophe. So I thought this term, catastrophe, is not telling the whole story. It tells the story that there are people who were victims of something terrible, but I thought for the sake of understanding what happened then and its relevance for our times, I need to know more. I don't want just to hear about the suffering of the people, which was very important to me, what they went through. I wanted to know who's responsible for what happened, because my own state, my own side, if you want, said, oh, we know who's responsible. They had a very clear story. They said the Arab leaders and the Palestinian leaders told the Palestinians to leave, and that's why they became refugees. And I thought that was a bit questionable, that people who lived for hundreds of years in a place would voluntarily leave the place. It didn't sound to me very logical. I said, I have to go deeper into this. And reading more generally on situation in which people in modern time became refugees, not by natural disaster, by human-made disasters, it was clear that one of the most common phenomena that uproots such a large number of people, we have to remember half of Palestine's Arab population was expelled within 9 months, that the only term that really describes the intention, the ideology, and the very action of the expulsion, and also what the expellers do after the expulsion, the only term from a legal perspective, academic perspective, and political perspective is ethnic cleansing. So I went first of all to the State Department. I said, let me see how the State Department defines ethnic cleansing. During the days of I was lucky, it was at the same time that American State Department was trying to understand what was happening in the former Yugoslavia. And that's when the term ethnic cleansing was used quite frequently to describe what happened. And the way they described the intentions, the language, the actions fitted exactly to what I found in the archives. Then I went to the United Nations definition, to the definition by international legal authorities as well. And everywhere, from every angle I looked at it, I couldn't see any better paradigm, any better prism through which to look at it. I must say, it was not easy to convince my publisher at the time to use the term ethnic cleansing. They tried to convince me to use a more tame title like what happened in 1948 and so on. And I insisted. I said, I have to publish it under this title because this is a story. But it was very difficult, even for very progressive publishers, to associate ethnic cleansing, which is a crime against humanity, with Israel or the Jewish people. And that's why they hesitated very much. But to their credit, they got the courage to do it. I'm not sure if they regret it or not, but that's too late anyway.
Well, the notion of ethnic cleansing presupposed some prior intention on the part of the main leaders of the future Israeli state. What do you see as this intention or these intentions?
Yeah.
Are there any, evidence and so on?
Well, from other cases of ethnic cleansing, we know that the idea first germinates as a vision. Even before the people who would execute the ethnic cleansing have the ability or the circumstances that would allow them to execute that. And that led me to go back to the origins of the Zionist movement and its early ideologues, and to examine how did they envision the land to which they came for the first time in 1882. And you learn that actually very much like the first European settlers who came to North America, to Central America, to South America, to Australia and New Zealand, and also South Africa, there's something common with the Jews who came to Palestine. Even before they were able to get rid of the indigenous native people, they already envisaged the country being totally empty of its indigenous people. I'll give you one example. The early painters of the Zionist movement used to draw pictures of the Palestinian landscape in places where I knew there were villages, and they already painted the hills or the valleys without the villages. That was an indication that they were already dreaming of a Jewish Palestine without any Arabs. Then, in the 1920s and the 1930s, they were talking more directly about the need to transfer, they called it, the Palestinians, ironically because they wanted a democratic Jewish state. They wanted a Jewish majority to make sure that every time there's a democratic election, this would reflect the Jewish majority. The real plans, I mean, the moment that ideologies like this are translated into strategies on the ground, always happened very near to the ethnic cleansing itself. In the case of Palestine, there was no point from a Zionist perspective to think strategically of how to empty the land from its Palestinian population as long as the British ruled Palestine, which was between 1918 until the beginning of 1947. The moment Britain announced in February 1947 it is going to leave Palestine, that's the moment that the Zionist leadership began to translate general ideas of transfer into practical programs of massive expulsion of the Palestinian population.
So what was the role of the Britain back then? Like they were doing the expulsion of Palestinian people before the 1947, or what was their role in all this?
Well, the British are very complicit in all of this. First of all, by accepting the idea that Palestine in 1917, which had less than 8% of Jewish population in it, should be a Jewish state through the Balfour Declaration. The very idea that Britain can give Palestine to a Jewish national movement without consulting the Palestinians was the basis on which the Zionist movement could say to itself, oh, we have international support for our idea. Those British policymakers, by the way, which I describe in a new book I finished called Lobbying for Zionism Across the Atlantic, those British politicians who were against the Balfour Declaration, against the idea that Britain would promise the Jewish national movement someone else's homeland, those British politicians warned, as I show in my new book, I give long quotes they say very directly, if we are going to promise Palestine to the Jews of Europe, two things are going to happen. One is this would be a catastrophe for the people who live in Palestine itself, but we are also worried of what it will do to the Jews in Europe itself. That it would increase anti-Semitism against the Jews, because the claim is that the Jews are not Europeans, they are a different nation. And that is what also the anti-Semites are claiming. So that was the first British level of accountability. Then the early ethnic cleansing already started in the 1920s, the mid-1920s. The Zionist movement bought land in Palestine, first of all, to try and have a foothold. Now, and the land that it bought from landlords who were not Palestinians, they lived in Beirut. The land that they bought, on the land that they bought, were Palestinian villages. According to the Ottoman law, if you buy a land such large that has already villages in it, the change of land ownership should not affect the people of the village. But the British agreed with the Zionists that they should introduce a European notion of land ownership. So they bought land, and the British police evicted in 1926 11 Palestinian villages already then. And the worst part is the last 6 months of the British rule in Palestine, from January 1948, 5 months, January 1948 to May 1948. In those 5 months, the Zionist forces ethnically cleansed most of the urban centers of Palestine. In the book, I called it herbicide. It's a total destruction of the Palestinian city, its people. In my hometown, Haifa, 75,000 Palestinians lived. 3,000 were left after 2 days of bombardment and expulsion. So it was a total destruction of the urban center. Now, when you destroy, and this is under British eyes, when Britain is still responsible for law and order, when you destroy an urban center in a society like the Palestinian one, you also destroy the elite. You destroy the financial elite, the economic elite, the cultural elite, and it makes it much easier for you to drive out the rest of the population from the rural areas.
Go ahead. Let's have a drink.
I can still do both.
In the preface to the Czech edition, you say that 1948 established the approach that Israel has taken to the Palestinian population ever since. Can you describe the manifestations of this effort to ethnically cleanse the territory, in the later stages of State of Israel?
Yeah. I think what is very important to know that for the young Israeli state, it was very important to know that the international community did not condemn it for the ethnic cleansing. That was a very important message. And I think because of that, as I say in the book, the idea that you can continue with the ethnic cleansing in order to fulfill the dream of a democratic Jewish state can continue. So I called it in the book that the ethnic cleansing became kind of the DNA of the Zionist ideology after 1948. And the proof is in what Israel has done ever since. In order to make sure that the Palestinians are not part of the, as we call it in Republican terms, of the common good, that they are not equal citizens, sometimes you don't have just to expel them. There are other methods you can use, but they're equal to ethnic cleansing. Because the important thing is to say, if you are not a Jew and you're an Arab in Israel, you can never be a full citizen, or best, you can be encouraged to leave, even if we don't have the circumstances to expel you by force. So let's look at 1948 to 1967. Israel took over almost 80% of historical Palestine, did not expel all the Palestinians from the area that became Israel. Israel was able to expel 90% of the Palestinians who lived in what became the State of Israel. So you had a small Palestinian minority that became what the Israelis would call the Israeli Arabs, or today we call them the Palestinian minority in Israel. During those years, between 1948 to 1967, Israel did two things. It imposed military rule on the Palestinians in Israel. Military rule means that the military commander has all the authorities that usually a state has towards the people under his control. He can close a business, he can banish a people or a person, he can close their businesses, he can destroy their homes, he can shoot them without being afraid, and so on. We know this repertoire from the military regime that would be imposed later on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip after 1967. Secondly, Israel managed to expel another 10 to 11 villages during that period. So the ethnic cleansing continued, not on the same level. And here we come to 1967. Very much like every movement that I mentioned before, that colonized the United States, colonized Australia, nowadays we have a name for it. We call it settler colonial movements. Very much like other settler colonial movements, you always work in two dimensions. You want the space, the land of the new country, but you don't want the people who live on it. So when you take more of the land, you get more of the people that you don't want. Israel could not resist the circumstances of 1967 to take over the 20% of Palestine it was unable to occupy in 1948. But occupying the West Bank and the Gaza Strip incorporated almost the same number of Palestinians that Israel got rid of in 1948. As I showed in another book of mine, which is called The Big Prison on Earth, the Israeli government in 1967 seriously contemplated to repeat the ethnic cleansing of 1948 in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but decided against it in the last moment because the war wasn't going on. It was a short war. There was already television, and there was a fear that Palestinian refugees would resist being refugees again, because many people who lived in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were already refugees. Nonetheless, Israel expelled during June 67 300,000 Palestinians from the Jordan Valley, from the Greater Jerusalem area, and from some parts of the Gaza Strip. And from 1967 until today, in various means, Israel expelled more than 500,000 Palestinians. And people here, I'm sure, part of the Palestinian community in Prague, are people who left the West Bank after 1967. And if you left the West Bank for more than a year, the Israelis wouldn't allow you to come back. So there are various methods. That's why I say it's part of the DNA. The ethnic cleansing is a structure in the Israeli way of looking at things. I belong to a society whose leaders and ideologues believed that life will never be normal and good as long as there are a large number of Arabs inside that society. Now, there are good people in that society who would not accept this kind of an idea, but the majority of Israeli Jews would like to dream about an Israel without Arabs, without Palestinians. What happened through the years, that politicians in powerful positions began to implement these dreams against, like the early leaders of Zionism in 1948, and that's what we're seeing is happening today.
What's interesting, in your book, you are mentioning that in the modern age, it is extremely difficult to hide such monstrous crimes like one that happened in Palestine after Second World War and 48. But despite this fact, Israel managed to do exactly that. How were they able to conceal what they did in Palestine in 1947-48?
Yes, this is amazing. That's why I wrote my recent book, Lobbying for Zionism. I hope that through tracing the history of lobbying in two very important places, Britain, the United States, I'll have at least a partial answer to your question. But let's first talk about the phenomenon, which is incredible. I talk a lot with leaders and politicians in the United States, in Britain. I even had the pleasure of talking with some parliamentarians in this country and in other European countries. The denial of what happened in 1948 continues to this very day. This is incredible. The greatest success of the Israeli lobby is to say, you know, if you hear about the story that Palestinians were expelled intentionally and half of their villages were destroyed and all their towns were demolished, yeah, that's controversial. That's controversial. There is a counter-narrative to that, as if you would say there's a counter-narrative to the Holocaust. There's no counter-narrative to the Holocaust. There was a genocide of the Jews. That's it. There's no counter-narrative. If you present a counter-narrative to the Holocaust, in some places, and maybe rightly so, you'll be arrested as a neo-Nazi. But to deny the catastrophe of the Palestinians is a legitimate moral and academic position, which is unacceptable. It's really unacceptable. But it's a fact. It's a fact. And I think this has to do a lot with a very effective lobbying machine. The Palestinians themselves are a very normal people. They were not prepared for that kind of life. And they're not always handling very well their own, diplomacy and propaganda. And they're not united, as you know. So it's an easier case for Israel to deal with. The Arab world talks a lot but does very little for the Palestinians. And the same is true about the Muslims. You have, I think, the best way of understanding it is to acknowledge that from the moment the idea that Palestine should be a Jewish state was conceived until today, a very powerful alliance stood behind this idea. In the 19th century, it was Christian Zionists who believed that if Palestine is Jewish, this would bring back Jesus Christ, the resurrection of the dead, and the end of time. Britain believed that if Palestine would be Jewish, it would serve British imperialism. Then the United States believed that if Palestine would be Jewish, it would serve its strategies in the Cold War. The multinational corporation believed that if Israel is a Jewish state, they can make more money in arms industry and security industry. All the time, and then there was the European guilt complex about the Holocaust. It's much better to offer the Jews a state in Palestine than a state in Europe in order to compensate them. So you have these, as my dear friend Radha Karmi said to me, I would think about my grandfather sitting in a village near Jenin at the time when already half of the leaders of the world were talking about turning his country into a Jewish state. What could he have done? He was a farmer. His father was a farmer. His grandfather was a farmer. His great-grandfather was a farmer. What could he have done against an alliance that has Christian ideology, European guilt complex, British colonialism, American imperialism, multinational capitalism? And he's sitting there, in the village, and he's about to be kicked out in 1948. And there's nothing he can do. What can he do? He hopes that the Arab world would save him. But the Arab world did not come to save him. He hopes that maybe the Muslim world will save him. And they didn't come. So I think this powerful alliance also is responsible for the denial of what happened to the Palestinians. And without acknowledging what happened in 1948, we will never move forward towards reconciliation in Israel and Palestine.
You personally left Israel in 2007, if I'm correct. Was this related to your book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine? after all, it was published just a year before you left to Britain. Can you tell us more about the reactions that you did encounter in Israel at that time? Like, how was it, like, after releasing this book?
Yeah, the book was not the main reason. My problem with the Israeli academia in general and my own university in particular started in 2000. Because from 2000, my ideas became more clear to me, at least. And they were reflected in the way I was teaching at the University of Haifa, courses on the Nakba, on 1948, in my interviews, my articles in Haaretz and other places. So long before the book appeared, already in 2002, the Minister of Education called the University of Haifa to fire me. And in 2002, a very famous journalist called upon the Israelis more or less to kill me. He said, it was a famous picture that I'm not sure that I repeated it. Yes, he put my picture next to a target, and he says, I'm not telling you to kill this man, but I wouldn't object if you do this. And then came a lot of threats, already in 2002, long before I wrote this book. And the University of Haifa, in a populist move, said, okay, we'll take him to trial, because I had tenure, and accused me of lack of patriotism and collegiality. It was a 10 pages indictment, but there was a huge international pressure on the university, so they suspended the legal action. But what happens, and friends of mine in Israel in academia who are now voicing resistance to the war in Gaza are going through the same process. First, the university is trying to expel you, then it realizes it doesn't look too good in the world, but then you cannot really stay in the university. Because you can't stay in a place that doesn't want you. So I left. I was also worried about what it would do to my doctorate students. So I wasn't expelled from the country. I was expelled from the Israeli academia. But I also left the country because I needed the job elsewhere. I do go back whenever I can. They may rob me of my citizenship or not, I don't know, but that doesn't matter. But it was really an expulsion from the academia, to kind of make it correct, and not from the state itself.
We were saying that the issues of 1948 are like taboo for Israeli society, but they are more or less taboo on the international level as well. You were detained this May in the United States and questioned in Detroit. And in addition to the whole series of strange questions, you were allegedly asked about your solution to the so-called Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So what was your answer?
In general, I refused to answer because I told them that I'm beginning a lecture tour and they're invited to come to my lectures. But they insisted, so I gave very laconic answers. The first question they asked me is, do I frame what happens in the Gaza Strip as a genocide? And I said yes. And they said, do you care to expand on this? And I said, no, I care not to. But you're invited to my lectures, I will explain. So they tried something else, and then they said, do you believe in the slogan, Palestine should be free from the river to the sea? I said, yes. And then they said, can you expand on this? I said, yes, I can. I said, everywhere in the world where people live between the river and the sea, they should be free. So one of them wanted to show me that he knows his geography. He said, what about Saudi Arabia? I said, okay, everywhere where there's a country between two sources of water, which probably doesn't include Bulgaria, but I'm sorry about that. But I think people in Bulgaria would have to find another slogan for their freedom, yeah. But then I think they realized that either, I wasn't sure whether they wanted to have a free course in history from a famous historian, or they wanted just to bother me, but that was very weird and very, anyway. Well, it wasn't too bad. I mean, people went through far worse ordeals in their life, yes.
But it's not something that you encounter very often? Like
No,
in United States,
not 2.5 hours, and they took my phone and copied everything with me, which I foolishly had everything on my phone, so I don't know what they're going to do with this. But I think it was just an intimidation which is a good thing, isn't it? I mean, if people think that you should go to the United States, you probably are doing good things in the United States. I will continue going to the United States. Yeah.
Let's talk about the recent situation in Gaza. What do you think will be the consequences of what the Israeli army is doing now in Gaza? Does this brutal treatment endanger the very, let's say, existence of the state of Israel, in your view?
I think, unfortunately, in the short term, I can only see the continuation of the Israeli military operation. I can also see these operations extended to the West Bank. I see a real danger for an escalation in the north between Israel and Hezbollah, which might escalate to regional war. So I don't see any exit points, and this is terrible news for people who live in Gaza and the West Bank in the very near future, I have to say. Even if there are indicators that some countries in the global south are willing to do something, that the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court are willing to take action, I'm afraid this would not be enough to stop the Israelis. However, in the long run, I do believe, and I say it as an academic, not as an activist necessarily, that we are seeing the beginning of the end of the Zionist project. And I say this, I say it also to my Israeli friends, I say whether you like this vision or you are afraid of that vision, that should be the conversation. Not the future of the Palestinians, but the future of the Israelis. Because Israel is like a building that already had very serious cracks in that foundation, in the foundation of the building. The attack on the 7th of October is like an earthquake. It widened the cracks extensively. And I think that there are certain processes, one of them the implosion of the Israeli society from within. After 76 years, the Israeli Jewish society finds out that they have very little in common with each other, even in the face of what they say is the common enemy. The whole idea of Judaism as a national identity is not working. And this is something that is now out in the open in almost a cold civil war, which I think will destroy Israel from within, not because of the clash itself, but because who's going to win this clash. And the people who's going to win the clash come from what I call the state of Judea, which is the new Israeli state that was born in the settlements. They have a messianic vision of a theocratic Israel, a very racist Israel that doesn't care about international law and have God on their side and would empty the land from the Palestinians. This is not going to happen, but they are going to try and do this, and this will bring the downfall. Also, I think the amazing developments among Jewish communities, especially in the United States, the younger generation does not see itself anymore as Zionists. I think that international solidarity movement is growing and making Israel much more isolated. Yes, the Israelis would have still a multinational corporation with arms deals, and they would have the Czech Republic supporting them. It would be the last state on earth that would support Israel in a messianic state, but you know,
That was my next question.
we will deal with the Czech state later on. Together with Micronesia. The Czechs are not alone. And they will remain probably with the Christian Zionists, who will still believe that this is good, actually, to have a battle of all the times, you know, that Gog against Magog at the end of time. But I think it really is going, there are two questions here. Am I right in this analysis that this is a project that is collapsing? Like, by the way, many states around Israel. This is not just Israel. Syria is not a state anymore. Lebanon is in a very precarious situation. Libya is not a state anymore. Iraq and Yemen are in a very, very dangerous chapter in their history. The European mistake, and the Western mistake, and the Zionist mistake was that they thought Israel was not part of the Arab world. The Arab world, the nation states in the Arab world, not all of them, are collapsing. There was no reason to think that Israel would be an exception. For different circumstances. But Israel is now a proper state of the Eastern Mediterranean, what we call in Arabic the Mashriq. The Eastern Mediterranean nation states are disintegrating, including Israel. So this is something that's going to happen. The question is, would the Israelis realize that they can work together with the Palestinian Liberation Movement and create a different kind of a political reality in the future based on equality, based on rectification of past evil, based on the return of the Palestinian refugees, based on justice, and build something together, or refusing to go with history and pay a very high price, which I don't want them to pay, but they will pay a very high price, like the Crusaders paid and others who were not willing to understand where they are located historically, culturally, and geographically. And I think that is very important. So I'm talking about a very dangerous process, the beginning of a collapse. It's dangerous because it creates a void, a chaos, but it also opens new opportunities. And a lot depends on the Palestinian national movement, ability to unite itself, to provide us with a clear vision for the future, and have a better organization than they're having now. I do hope that there is a new generation, I think there is, of Palestinians who would do this. And then we can fill the void with something which will be beneficial for everyone. But these are the two options. What we shouldn't do is fall into the trap of the two states discourse, because that is not meant to solve anything. That is meant to leave the situation as it is, with the hope that this is kind of undercover. And this is not, we know it failed again and again and again, so it's not going to work.
When you were talking about this optimistic version of future development of Palestine and Israel, do you see any positive signs from the, let's say, Israeli side as well? That something like this could happen or be formed and so on?
No, it would be too unrealistic to expect them now to accept, A, that this is a realistic vision, and that it even has a positive side to it. But, Israeli Jewish society is a society in trauma. Let's not underestimate what the 7th of October did to the Israeli Jewish society. They are under trauma for certain reasons, which I hope would at least lead some of them to look in that direction. And they are trauma because the army couldn't defend them, and they're not sure the army will be able to defend them anymore. They're in trauma because the government is not functioning, and they're not sure at all that the government will be functioning in the future. And they're in trauma because the economy is deteriorating and now totally depends on the United States, and they're not sure that the United States will always support Israel. They are in total insecurity, like I've never experienced before in Israel. 500,000 Israelis already left Israel. And I think that one can only hope, and one should try and help with this process, that there will be a late realization of the real significance of the 7th of October. That is about the limits of power, the limits of violent oppression, of imposing yourself on other people, and believing that, and they know that the Palestinians in their millions, especially those who still live in historical Palestine, contrary to the propaganda that Israel itself spreads, are the last people in the world who wants to drive anyone to the sea. The only people who were driven ever to the sea, literally, in Palestine were the Palestinians of Jaffa and Akka and Haifa. No, they are most welcoming and a vision of a joint future, but not on the basis of the Zionist ideology, not on the basis of apartheid, not on the basis of a racist regime. And I don't think it will happen now. I have hopes that it will happen, but let me add, like in the case of apartheid South Africa, this is not a precondition for the liberation of Palestine. An Israeli consent to give up the apartheid state and build a non-apartheid state, the Israeli Jewish consent, is not a precondition. We don't have to wait for their consent in order to start decolonization. The Africans did not wait for the white people to agree. And therefore, we have to do the pressure from the outside. We have to do the solidarity from the outside. If people tell me, you know, in a democratic Palestine, quite a few Jews would feel unwelcome and would leave. I said, what can we do? If they don't feel safe there and they have a way of leaving, okay. I don't think anyone would encourage them to leave, unlike what the Zionist movement is doing all the time to the Palestinians. In fact, I think people would like them to stay. But if they leave, it's their choice. And again, the prospect of their leaving should not disable us from envisioning liberation, decolonization, and freedom.
So finally, let's talk about Czechs.
Yeah.
As you already mentioned, the Czech Republic is still one of the biggest international allies of the Benjamin Netanyahu's government. What's your personal explanation? Like, do you see any historical reasons, or do you have any special interpretation?
Every Czech journalist asks me, why do you think we are so supporters of Israel? And I say, are you sure we are not confusing the roles? You're a Czech person, tell me. Anyway, I think...
I'll tell you.
Yeah, no. I think that in such cases, there are kind of three dimensions for an unreasonable, unjustifiable, immoral position like that of the Czech government. One is they created, and that's very interesting, very early on, already in the pre-communist Czechoslovakia, a totally false narrative of how important Czechoslovakia, that is before the Czech Republic, was in the creation of the Jewish state.
It is. There's this story.
Yeah, but it's bullshit. In academic terms, bullshit. Excuse my language. There is a story of Jan Masaryk and then the story of the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, saving Israel with its weapons and arms. The arms from Czechoslovakia did not save the Israeli army. Masaryk was in the Middle East for all kinds of reasons, not all of them, to become a member of the Zionist movement. But that doesn't matter, because you create a narrative that part of being a Czech, especially after the way the Nazi occupation went relatively unresisted, especially the chapter of expelling the Jews from here, politicians grow up like this by saying, it's my DNA is to be pro-Israeli, doesn't matter what happens. And so that's one dimension. It's a narrative which is false. It's not based on historical facts, but it's very much solidified by the Czech academics, by the Czech journalists, generation after generation. Secondly, to maintain it, you need a very effective lobby. And I think there is an effective Israeli lobby here that has its own commercials and business connection with some of the Czech captains of industry and politics. This also plays a role. Definitely the guilt complex, if you want, which I already mentioned. I think that, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I think unlike Hungary, in Hungary the support for Israel is totally anti-Semitic. I mean, Urban and his friends love the idea of Jews in Palestine because they don't love the ideas of Jews in Hungary. Which was always why the anti-Semites supported Zionism, still do today. I don't think this is true about the Czech Republic. I don't think you have that strong anti-Semitic forces here, which leads me to believe that this is the kind of combination of an effective lobby that was able to impose a narrative that you need some brave Czech academics in particular to challenge it. Now, academic courage is an oxymoron. It doesn't always happen. But hopefully there are academics, because you need a proper historical research to show that this is not true. And there is no particular reason why a democratic republic that sees itself part of the civilized world would continue to provide immunity for an apartheid state that now commits a genocide. This is unthinkable and unacceptable. I hope, which is terrible to say, that because I think Israel is going to be even worse in those terms in the future, that would make it even more difficult for people in this country, politicians in this country, to explain to their people why they continue to support it. May I add that certainly, like in so many Central European countries, Islamophobia plays a very important role as well. The fact that the liberation movement, twice the Palestinian liberation movement has not carried favor with the Czechs. The 1970s Palestinian liberation movement was very much to the left, supported by the Soviet Union. And that doesn't work too well in the post-communist Czech Republic. And then when the left disappointed all of us, including the secular Palestinian liberation movement, people moved to give a chance to the political Islamic liberation movement. And that doesn't go too well with the Islamophobic tendencies in the Czech society. So this also adds to this. So it's the best explanation one can give, but it's a good explanation in the sense that you know what to do. The question is, are there people who are willing to do this?
Yeah, hopefully there are more and more people who will talk about these things in Czech society. For my last question, before I open the let's say the debate with the audience as well, is there anything that you would do different regarding this book? Like, would you work with different documents, different archives? Is there a way how to improve the content of the book? What's your personal?
Because I wrote the book under very difficult circumstances. The first version. 6 years in which I was public enemy in Israel. I was watching what was going on. People don't remember, but the destruction of the West Bank while I was writing this book, the killing of my friends in Nazareth, and so on. So under these emotions, I made small mistakes of names and places and dates. And people said to me, you must regret these mistakes. And first I said yes, anyway, I corrected them by the time we got to the Czech edition. Yeah, but and then I said to myself, no, I don't regret it. Yes, I'm a human being. I wrote it under certain circumstances which definitely affected that side of the story. It's like a painter who does a good painting, but if you take the looking glass, you can find here and there that the red is unfortunately tainted a little bit with black where it should be brown or something like this. I thought this was a j'accuse in French. This was my letter of condemnation, you see. I don't know how you survive in this hot weather. You are lucky in the out. Believe me, you're standing, but you have oxygen. We don't. We ran out of oxygen. So don't feel discriminated. You are much more alive than we are. Okay. Coming back to this, I thought that this was a book written under a certain emotional whirlwind, and it had a bit of impact and so on. So I don't think I would have been able to write the narrative I did if I was not motivated emotionally, morally, and ideologically with this. Maybe it would have become a totally accurate book without even one mistake, but without the soul. It would be a soulless book. So no, I don't regret this at all, Anastas.
Thank you for your answers. Maybe it's time to open up the debate. Is there anyone who would like to... oh, there's a couple of hands back there. I don't know how to get the microphone there, but...
More like an ask questions that got a strong voice. I think another possible explanation for why the Czechs support Israel is that if it's wrong to ethnically cleanse Palestine, it might have been wrong to ethnically cleanse Sudetenland in 1945 and 1946. But my question is, do you think the Israeli government really thinks that by murdering and maiming thousands of Palestinians, it's going to make Israelis safe? Or is it just a cynical pretext to stay in power?
I think the Israeli politicians don't think that profoundly. I mean, they don't ask themselves this question: do we make Israel safe? Think about Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you think Benjamin Netanyahu asked himself the question, am I making Israel more safe, or am I making my seat more safe? So you have, first of all, you have a group of politicians, all kinds of politicians in Israel. You have to break it down. You have Netanyahu-like politicians who don't ask this question. They ask, does the war serve my political survival? And the answer they give is yes. Then you have the messianic Israelis, the Smotrich, the Ben-Gvirs, who say to themselves, I don't ask myself, is Israel safe? Am I developing actually the scenario in which the Jewish people would be safe in the future, because we need this catastrophe? Very much like the Christians are evangelical. They have the same vision. You need a huge war in order for the Jewish people to build the third temple and recreate the golden period of the biblical times. So you are left with some reasonable politicians, not so much in the government, but in the Zionist opposition. I think they think that this government is endangering Israel. They do. If you talk to Gantz, if you talk to Lapid, if you talk to the new leader of the Israeli Zionist left, Yair Golan, they will tell you, yes, Israel is becoming a less safe place. But when you ask them, what is your solution, they have very little to offer, because they cannot think out of the Zionist mindset. And the Zionist mindset, even in its most liberal version, is making Israel as an unsafe place. Unsafe in the sense that it's leading to that catastrophe that I'm talking about. So they have to think out of the box. But it's very difficult, as we mentioned in our conversation. So I think different Israeli politicians have different answers to your question. And the problem with those who answer in the affirmative, they tell you, yes, Israel is, because of that government, is in a dangerous place. They have very little to offer. I remember one of the mothers of a young man who was abducted to Gaza, was interviewed in Israeli radio, and she said, apart from the fact that I think that the government doesn't care at all about the people who were abducted, what really bothers me, she said, that everyone from the opposition to the prime minister are saying to us, the next 50 years for Israel are going to be the same. One war after the other, one cycle of bloodshed after the other. This is the horizon. This is how Israel will look in the next 50 years. And I say to myself, is this what you say to millions of people as the future? So this is a mental deadlock, that the political elite is in it, and therefore I think that's not a proper conversation to have with them right now. I hope maybe a bit later there will be some openness and we can have this dialogue with the Israeli political elite.
There were two hands raised with around the guy who was shouting. Are you ready to shout as well? Or
yes,
yeah.
I will try. Okay, let me do it. I have two questions, and about the future, how you look at the future, because you were telling already something about it. My first question is actually, Israel is a nuclear power, or how you call it. Yeah. What do you think is the influence of the importance of that in the future story? And my second question is, we now are supposed to be in a time of transition, that the United States was the sole hegemon on the planet, and we're probably going to a more multipolar planet. Do you think that that can have any impact on this conflict, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. As for the first question, I know people think that Israel would do the Masada thing the moment it would feel under existential threat and use the nuclear weapons. But you cannot use the nuclear weapons in a small country like Israel without destroying yourselves. It's like Iran saying that Iran can use the nuclear weapons. I think it's worrying to think that someone like Netanyahu has, if you want, the hand of the red button. But I don't think that this is, to my mind, this is not going to be a reliable option unless this is a total suicidal scenario, which can happen. I don't want to rule it out. But it's not just one person. You need to involve quite a lot of people for that to happen. Somehow this is beyond my imagination. As for the multipolar system, yes, I think you're right. America is not as hegemonic as it was. It's still very hegemonic in the Middle East. And in that part of the Middle East we're talking about, there are counter forces like Russia and China. In both cases, I don't think that at this moment in time, these two powers are interested in being involved beyond certain aspects, economic aspects in the case of China. In the case of Russia, strategic involvement that helps Russia in another front in Europe. So I don't think these are counterweights. I think the more important counterweights to America are regional powers. Iran, if it would, and I think it would, undergo its own transformation in terms of human rights and civil rights, which is, it has to undergo that revolution. I think that kind of Iran could play a very important role, a counter role to the United States. The same is true about Turkey. So there are forces that can help us to have different ideas from the one that the peace process led by America would bring into the area. But you need some mini revolutions also in other places. That might happen. Yeah.
Is there anyone else? Okay.
I have a question. You talked about the narrative that there is in Czech Republic about Czechoslovakia saving the Israeli state, which I agree with. It's pretty much as you said. What is the narrative that is, in your opinion, real or true, that at least by what you learned?
What is the narrative?
What is the real narrative of what happened? Like, what the role Czechoslovakia played in that? Yeah.
I got you. So first of all, I think that the Masaryk trip to Palestine is overrated as an important chapter in Czech history. It wasn't. And as for the most important one, the Czech military aid, the Israeli army was better equipped than definitely the Palestinians had no army, but better equipped than the Arab armies because the Arab armies that could have made a difference, such as Egypt and Jordan and Syria, got most of their weapons from Britain and France. And Britain and France imposed embargo on armed shipments to these Arab armies. Secondly, the Israelis developed their own military industry, which helped them, and smuggled a lot of weapons from Britain and from the United States. So it played a role, but not the kind of crucial role. The Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia did not save the State of Israel. The State of Israel was not under existential danger, given the military imbalance of power towards the Palestinians, and the way the Arab armies were equipped and miscoordinated, and the other reasons which I also detailed in the book. The most important Arab army was the Jordanian army, and Jordan had a secret agreement with Israel that in return for annexing the West Bank to Jordan, the Jordanian army would play a very minimal role in the attempt to save the Palestinians, which happened. So this is what is the most important facts.
So maybe the last question, and then we have to end, so if you can shout.
Yes, I can. I'm coming from an academic site, Czech academia site, with a great community of students coming from Israel. And I think partly the Israeli students already are realizing that Israel will not be safe in future. Would you think that there is already a strategy that Czech Republic could kind of serve as a new land for Israelis? Just my comment.
I don't think you need the Czech Republic for this. What we have is two different societies in Israel. You have the Israelis who originally came from Europe, even the second and third generation, who all have European passports, and usually also have occupation they can reignite outside of Israel. So that's why in Berlin today you have 40,000 Israelis, because the German government in particular is generous for obvious reasons of giving passports to Israelis, and not only passports, citizenships. So I think that there's no need for that kind of initiative. That is happening anyway. The question is different. I think the question is, will the EU, as an EU, be willing to play the role that eventually it was willing to play against apartheid South Africa? And that is to lead eventually the United States to impose sanctions in order to change the reality on the ground. Now, my guess is that the Czech Republic will not be the first member state of the EU to suggest sanctions on Israel. But even if it will be the last EU member states, we didn't sweat here for nothing.
So yeah, I was instructed that we should close this hall at 7:30. So is it still?
5 minutes.
Still one last question. Okay.
I actually have two questions, and I have many questions.
Louder, please.
I condense into two. Okay. I don't really like microphones, but fine. The first question would be, so back in time, there was a moment when there was a choice between a two-state resolution and a one-state resolution. And as we all know, we went for the two-state resolution. Why do you think that we went for that rather than a one-state resolution? And then the second question is a little bit more emotional, and because at least my generation and younger people even, we are denied to get in touch with people from Palestine. We don't have this privilege and possibility. So since you said that you had privilege and opportunity to meet many of them, I wanted to ask you how they are, what kind of personality they have, what identity they have.
Yeah. Okay. There was one moment in 1947 when the United Nations took over from Britain the question of what should be the solution for Palestine. And the United Nations, as you know, established a special commission, UNESCO, the United Nations Special Commission of Palestine. And the members of the committee produced two reports as an idea for a solution. One was the idea of partition, two-state solution, which the Palestinians rejected, and also the Arab world did not accept. And the other one was for a democratic state all over Palestine. And the committee voted in favor of the partition, although there were quite a few members in it that also supported one state. It's an important moment in history because the Palestinians, from the beginning of the Zionist project in Palestine, were saying to the West, you have defeated the Ottoman Empire that ruled our place for 400 years. Fine, that's good. You tell us that instead of the empire, there won't be other empires ruling us, but you're bringing us the message of self-determination, the famous promise by President Woodrow Wilson, the American president, for a new world. Fine, we're willing to vote on self-determination. And you are also bringing us the message of democracy. So, according to your idea of what should Palestine be after the Ottomans ruled Palestine, is that the people of Palestine would democratically decide what is the nature of Palestinian self-determination. And we are willing to go along with it. But you tell us no. In your case, it will work in the case of Lebanon, of Iraq, of Syria, of Jordan, any other country. In your case, you don't have self-determination. You will have to share the country with the national movement of the Jews and only get half of the country. And this was violating the idea of democracy. It was violating the idea of self-determination. And whenever there were Palestinians after 48, and there were, we know, who agreed, there still are Palestinians, who agreed to talk about the two-state solution, especially after 1967, it is not because they accept that this is the way Palestinian self-determination should look like, or that this is democratic. They, especially people who live in the, and that connects to your second question, people who live in the West Bank under not only military occupation, under daily harassment by Jewish settlers, hope that the two-state solution will end the occupation and the harassment by the settlers. But I think many of them understand that this is not going to be the case after Oslo, that what is talked as a two-state solution is another way of occupation and oppression. And therefore, I think that this is very important to go back to this idea. But in any case, you know, for 76 years, the world said, let's ask Israel what it wants and see how the Palestinians react. It started to reverse it. Let's ask the Palestinians what they want and see how Israel reacts. That would be a good beginning. As for your question, I don't know. I mean, there are many Palestinians from Europe and from me, because I think you're talking about Palestinians inside. It's a difficult question to answer. There was not that much time. So maybe I'm condensing to one particular thing that really bothers me and should galvanize you to be more active, all of you, and be hopeful. I think it's very important to be hopeful, even in the dark times, and there's good reasons to be hopeful. When I haven't been in the Gaza Strip for a while, for obvious reasons, but I go often to the refugee camps in the West Bank, and one of my last visits was to the Jenin refugee camp. The Jenin refugee camp is treated by Israel like Gaza. People don't report it, but it's treated like Gaza. It's being bombarded for the air. The children are being killed there on a daily basis. Jenin is a little Gaza under Israeli genocide policies. Nobody reports it. Nobody reports it. So I go there, at least I can go there. And I tell people there about the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, about the encampments, and so on. And they look at you and they say, this has no impact on us. So we have to remember that. People there are dying, suffering, so we're not doing enough. We should do more.